A giant serpent weaving through the land, uncontrollable, unstoppable, a mighty force of nature. The lordly Shannon, the greatest inland waterway in Britain and Ireland. Lakes spreading like seas across the central lowlands, numerous tributaries reaching into the very heart of Ireland, touching 13 counties and draining 1/5 of the land area of the country.
Impressive facts and statistics. What we want to do in this series of videos is take them out of the pages of the geography book and bring them to life as we explore the living reality of Ireland's great river. We start in this programme by looking at the Shannon under 3 main headings.
Profile. We trace its course across Ireland from source to sea. Major geographical features. Running water shown as a continuous agent for change. And finally, how man harnessed the mighty Shannon to produce electricity.
Where to start our study should be obvious, the source. But the true source of the Shannon is not at all obvious. You expect the source to be some kind of a secret place, but somebody has stripped away the Shannon's secrecy, perhaps for the benefit of the tourist industry. And so here we are at the so-called source, the Shannon Pot, at the foothills of the Cuilcagh Mountains in County Cavan.
The little pool is deep and dark under a canopy of willow and hazel. It is thought, however, that the real source is Lough Gara, a nearby lake which is joined to the Shannon Pot by an underground stream.
From this small beginning, the river sets out on its 344-kilometre course to the sea.
It soon opens out into its first great lake, Lough Allen, surrounded by the hard sedimentary mountains of central Leitrim, especially the purple-clad Slieve an Éireann on the east side. These are the last significant mountains we will see till we reach Lough Derg, over 150 kilometres downstream. Not far below Lough Allen, the Shannon meets its first major tributary, the Boyle River, which is just as big as the Shannon itself. The Boyle River drains the scenic lakes of Lough Gara and Lough Key. As we approach Leitrim's capital, Carrick-on-Shannon, drumlins dominate the landscape. These low, rounded hillocks provide the best farmland in this otherwise poor farming area. They were deposited during the Ice Age by retreating glaciers. Below Carrick-on-Shannon, the river basin opens out into the central lowlands of Ireland with its underlying limestone rock. The chemical dissolution of this limestone rock is probably responsible for the series of beautiful lakes that characterise the next stretch of the Shannon. Lough Tap, which blends into Lough Boderg and Lough Bofin. At the end of this section, the river finally narrows again to give a crossing point at Rooskey. A further 8 kilometres downstream is Lough Forbes, bordered on the east side by the ecologically famous woodlands, marshlands and habitats of the Castle Forbes domain. Lanesborough, with its power station and bridge, the gateway to the great Lough Ree. Headlands, islands and shoals composed of boulder-rich glacial drift punctuate this, the Shannon's second major lake. Bordered on the west by County Roscommon and on the east by counties Longford and Westmeath, Lough Ree receives the Shannon's next major tributary, the Inny. The Inny extends the Shannon's catchment to the inland lakes of Cavan and Westmeath, Lough Allen, Lough Derg and Lough Sheelin. The southern end of Lough Ree funnels into this narrow fording point at Athlone, and there begins the Shannon's middle section from Athlone to Shannon Bridge and on to the top of Lough Derg. South of Athlone, the river becomes wide and sluggish and subject to extensive flooding in winter. A major feature of the landscape are the esker ridges running approximately east-west. These mark the course of glacial rivers. Between the esker ridges, shallow lakes remained after the Ice Age, where peat developed over time. This is being harvested today for electricity generation, here at Shannon Bridge and upstream at Lanesborough. Just below Shannon Bridge, the River Suck, the third major tributary, enters, this time from the west. A little further downstream, the Brosna joins from the east. Just at its confluence, Ireland's most important canal, the Grand Canal, also links up with the Shannon system. And further south again, The little Brosna flows in from the east. Soon the Shannon's largest lake, Lough Derg, appears. Lough Derg is different and very spectacular, especially towards its lower end. With Slieve Berna in the foreground rising sheer on the west side and the hard sandstones of the Ara Mountains to the east, the behaviour of the Shannon in cutting through the mountains at Killaloe remains a puzzle to geographers. Why did the river not take the easy route through the soft limestones at Scariff Bay? One explanation is that at one time the central plain of Ireland stood much higher, and when it was denuded the river retained its original course, having carved its way through the rock sill at Killaloe. In all its 344-kilometre journey, the Shannon drops a mere 150 metres, the first 90 metres within 16 kilometres of its source. Its whole central portion is virtually flat, at 36 metres above sea level. Then between Killaloe and Limerick, it drops from 36 metres above sea level to sea level in less than 20 kilometres. On reaching Limerick, the Shannon has an average flow rate of 178 cubic metres per second, a greater volume than the combined total of Ireland's other major rivers, the Liffey, Lee, Boyne, Lagan and Foyle.
Here at Corbally Weir, just above the city of Limerick, the fresh waters of the river mingle with the salt waters of the sea. This defines the point where the river ends and the estuary begins.
The Shannon is one of the finest deep-water estuaries in Europe. The estuary, however, continues to drain the surrounding countryside with the rivers Meg and Deal entering from County Limerick, the Feel from County Kerry and the Fergus from County Clare. And finally at Loop Head, where the cliffs fall steeply to the Atlantic below, the Shannon says goodbye to Ireland.
We've seen the Shannon from source to sea. Now let's turn to the second part of our study, the major geographical features of the river.
Most rivers show three stages of development from source to mouth: the upper or young valley stage, the middle or mature valley stage, and the lower or old age stage. The Shannon is different. Even before it enters Lough Allen, it starts to exhibit many of the features of a mature river. Between Athlone and Portumna, it is a classical lower course valley. A virtually non-existent gradient, a wide floodplain in many places lower than the river, so constantly susceptible to major flooding. When the river is in flood, it erodes and carries large deposits of soil and silt. As the floodwaters rise and flow over the river's normal banks, it slows down and deposits most of its load along these banks. After repeated flooding, these deposits build up to form long ridges called levees. Man often builds on these natural levees, creating retaining dikes. The outer reach of the floodplain is defined by the edge spur or bluff. This is often not very clear, but it can be noted by the change in vegetation and land use. One feature, not too difficult to identify, is the meander. Water flows more quickly and is deeper on the outside of the river curve, eroding away the bank, while deposition takes place on the inside of the bend. That's why you usually steer your boat around the outside of the curve. The process of erosion and deposition slowly converts curves into meanders. The process continues until only a narrow neck of land separates the two banks. Eventually, usually in times of flood, the water cuts through the neck of land. Levee deposits seal off both ends of the abandoned meander, which then becomes an oxbow lake. After a period, these oxbow lakes fill with silt and finally dry up. They are then called meander scars. Great rivers like the Nile, the Rhone and the Ganges deposit large volumes of silt, where they slow down on entering the sea, thus forming deltas. This doesn't happen with the Shannon. The narrow shape of the estuary creates a strong tidal flow which prevents silting, making the Shannon Estuary a great natural deepwater port.
Our picture of the Shannon so far is one of a sluggish, lazy river. Well, that it may be for most of its course, but as if for man's benefit alone, it bursts into life for one short section between this bridge here at Killaloe and Limerick. Which brings us to our third major heading, the harnessing of the river to produce electricity.
After leaving Killaloe, the Shannon changes gear. Between here and Limerick, a distance of a mere 20 kilometres, it drops over 30 metres, releasing vast quantities of energy.
Harnessing this energy gave rise to the greatest engineering challenge in the history of the state, a milestone in Ireland's economic development, the Shannon Scheme.
1923, Ireland emerging from the nightmare of the Civil War, impoverished and demoralised. A rural economy, with 11 people on the land for every one in industry. The nation's first native government seeking to translate a newfound independence into social and economic progress, but with few options. Not surprisingly, the spine of the nation was to come to the rescue. A vision of progress formed in the mind of a young engineer, Thomas A. McLaughlin, while training in Germany. His experience in post-war Germany confirmed in him the belief that a cheap and plentiful supply of electricity was the key to economic progress and prosperity. Cheap meant, if possible, hydroelectric. There was already a number of small electricity generators in the cities and towns of Ireland, but supply was irregular and expensive. Plentiful meant a major scheme which only the mighty Shannon could possibly support.
Well, I had brought the data, the particulars relating to the Shannon to Berlin with me and asked the Germans, what output can we get out of this river? How would we go about designing it? So we used it simply as an example of hydro development. And to my astonishment, we found that we could get much more than I had ever seen spoken of before. That was really because we were developing the river in one step.
The conventional way to do this was to build a high dam with a power station at its base, to span the river valley and back up the waters into a large reservoir. Many years later, this design was used by ESB on the Liffey and the Lee. But the Shannon had to be different. Because of its flat middle course, any backing up and raising of river levels would have caused severe flooding. This was considered totally unacceptable. Instead, a great weir was built 5 kilometres south of Killaloe at Partine. This backs up the river just to the level of Lough Derg, but more importantly, it divides the river in two. To the left is the old river course. In order to keep the river fresh for fishing and environmental purposes, 10 tonnes of water per second is released down this channel. To the right is a canal. This massive canal, 100 metres wide and 12 metres deep, weaves through the countryside following the contour line of Lough Derg. To maintain this contour, in places the canal banks rise up to 20 metres above the surrounding countryside. In other places, it fits neatly into the landscape. The canal runs for 12.5 kilometres, with one objective: to deliver the Shannon waters to the power station at Ardnacrusha and create what is known as a head of water. The canal is called the head race canal. Below is the tail race. The difference in levels is called the head of water. The head, plus the volume of water, determine the generating capacity of the station. At Ardnacrusha, the head is 30 metres, representing the total fall of water between Killaloe and Limerick. The water flows from the higher level through large cylindrical pipes or penstocks into the turbines. There are 4 of these at Ardnacrusha. The power of the falling water turns the turbine blades which drive the electricity generators. The water, now having released its energy, escapes into the tailrace canal. This canal runs a further 2.5 kilometres till we see it here on the right, joining the Shannon River, just above Limerick.
By 1924, Dr. McLaughlin had convinced his German employers, Siemens Schuckert, to present the outline plan of the great scheme to the Irish government. Even though it was an outlandishly ambitious project for a new, insecure state with little financial resources, it caught the imagination of a brilliant young lawyer who'd just become Minister for Industry and Commerce, Patrick McGilligan. Like all pioneers, McLaughlin and McGilligan faced a tough battle with much opposition and criticism to get the plan accepted.
Criticism centred on the huge potential output of the station, 150 million units per year at a time when the entire national consumption was 50 million units. By 1935, national consumption had tripled to the 150 million units. In June 1925, a far-sighted government passed the Shannon Electricity Bill, and work began on what the critics dubbed McGilligan's White Elephant. 5,000 men, German and Irish, swarmed into the primitive countryside location with no infrastructure of roads, railways or housing. 138 locomotives and over 1,700 wagons were transported from Germany to Limerick to tackle the gigantic earth-moving operation. Over the grating and tearing noises of excavators and transporters could be heard a multilingual babble in Irish, English and German. Great concrete and steel structures began to emerge. By 1927, the world was taking note of an inspiring national success, and the people of Ireland came in their thousands to observe. In August of 1927, 2 years before the completion of the scheme, the Electricity Supply Board was established. The first semi-state company in the history of the state, a model for others to follow. It would control and manage not only Ireland's generation of electricity, but an even bigger challenge, the promotion and distribution of this revolutionary new power throughout the length and breadth of the country. The majestic Shannon, its physical profile dominating the central plains of Ireland, its geographical features, impressive examples of the power of running water in shaping the landscape, its energy, harnessed and distributed throughout the whole land, shifting the shadows of the past and powering the economic and social progress of the new Ireland.